You're listening to a Galactic Network podcast. For more, go to gncast.com.
We are the ElseNerds.
Hello and welcome to ElseNerds, a production of Galactic Network. I'm Gregor Sprague, and joining me is Corey Scott. And for all info on this show, including subscription links and show notes, go to ElseNerds.com. And for other Galactic Network programs, go to gncast.com. And as a warning, on ElseNerds, we tend to shut our mouths off without thinking, so we will both spoil things and swear liberally. You have been warned. And Corey, where are your glasses?
I just took him off. So ElseNerds is the show that Stephen Amell listens to in his car instead of Beyonce albums.
I would say besides being the elite episodes, to use a wrestling thing because he's friends with Cody Rhodes and all that. But
sure.
And he's going to be at a wrestling thing in September in Chicago, and I really want to go to it. But this is not a wrestling show. No, this is not. This is about, well, okay. With the exception of my ElseViews, it is not a wrestling show. But yeah, this is about everything else, including some quick news stories that, I mean, really, they're short and sweet, to the point. The first one.
That'll be a first.
Yeah, the first one is that SNL executive producer, creative mastermind behind a lot of things, Lorne Michaels, is leaving his Paramount deal to join over with Universal Films. You know, basically, he's not going to make any movies over with Paramount, going to Universal, and he's extending his deal with NBC. This is going to extend not only him at SNL, which it would be until the show hits the 50-year mark, but it'd be somewhere in 2025, but also extending his primetime deals with AP, his executive producing the half-hour comedy AP Bio, as well as executive producing all of the late night programming essentially on NBC with both the Tonight Show and Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers over there, as well as one IFC show that I will not mention because Corey hates it. And
you can talk about it all you want. I'm just going to need the shit.
Yeah, well, he also executive produced Portlandia and executive produces the show Documentary Now over at IFC.
What were the films that he's been doing with Paramount?
So I don't know which ones he's done over at Paramount, but Mean Girls, Baby Mama, Wayne's World, Tommy Boy, Three Amigos, there are some of the big ones that he's done.
So but pretty much everybody who's come from doing Saturday Night Live, going into movies, he's been the producer on their work.
Yeah, exactly. And like I think that's how it started, but I know because I think he executive produced FXX's Man Seeking Woman, but that was sort of through SNL because you look at Fred Armisen, who's the SNL connection to Portlandia.
I try not to.
Well, but still, I know you don't like him, but
I'm just teasing.
And then the director for a lot of the Portlandia episodes, and actually one of the executive producers on there, Jonathan Crystal, actually created executive produced Man Seeking Woman. And so it's basically like as soon as he gets an in with someone, then he's basically like, okay, boom, Broadway Video will help you out if you have an idea for something that is funny. But yeah, so that's really good to see. I mean, basically that, someone, with the staying power is going to be there, for, I looked at the SNL side, he's going to be there for, until 2025, where we're going to see a 50th anniversary, where hopefully we won't see Kanye West singing to the light stage thing right here in front of his face. 'Cause I'm so dumb on the SNL 40th anniversary special, but I digress.
Do you think that means Keenan's going to be there the entire time too?
God, there's part of me that hopes so, but at the same time, I don't, because if he's going to have a Tim Meadows career, I want to see him have the second part of the Tim Meadows career, much like the next little quick hit news story, where the Goldbergs spinoff is getting picked up 2 series by ABC with Tim Meadows, Bryan Callen, and AJ Michalka set to star. Now, this is interesting because they aired the pilot already. It aired as a special called 1990 something, which featured Tim Meadows and Bryan Callen, who Tim Meadows plays he
becomes the principal of the school right now. He in the Goldberg show, he's still one of the counselors.
The guidance counselor and all that stuff. and then Brian Callen was the gym teacher. And the interesting one for me is the fact that you're getting AJ Michalka, who plays Lainey Lewis, aka Barry Goldberg's girlfriend. And so it's one of those, like, with her coming in as a teacher. So that I'm like, that's interesting, because in theory you could have a Blackish Grownish thing where you got Dion Cole and Yara Shahidi appearing on both shows, but that they're set in the same time, not in theory possibly 10 years apart and stuff. So it's like, in one part she's gonna have to look 10 years older.
Well, it's funny because that is the thing, is that in theory 10 years apart, but not really, because the Goldbergs is always 1980 something. This is 1990 somethings. They could be 1 year apart, if that, but there's no way to really track. And it depends on how long the Goldbergs themselves actually intend to go. If Goldbergs go more than 10 seasons, which is effectively 10 years, they should ace themselves out of the 80s, but time is amorphous. It doesn't really matter. They've never given a statement as to anything. And obviously we've jumped forward in time and backward in time on that show in the references and stuff that they use. So you're just along for the ride to enjoy for the laughs. That's the thing that gets me, though, is that we saw essentially the premiere episode of this, the pilot spinoff, and I didn't think it was that great. I wanted it to be better. I liked all the people in it. Adding Lainey, because she's another established character and more established, I think, than Tim Meadows' character and the coach, may give it that extra something. She was very talented on the Goldbergs, but she was also always on there with either Barry or with Erica. Yeah. So,
well, the interesting part here with this is, the spinoff is being written by Mark Firek, Firek. And so this is a redoing of the pilot. So it's taking what that was and probably using the better parts of it, of the 1990 something special.
Do you think they're getting rid of the sister, Tim Meadows' sister, and her kid?
The other, I think so, because there's a quote in here that Adam F. Goldberg, the creator of both shows, and how this is, the Goldbergs is loosely based off of his life. He says that he's wanting to go away from the family aspect and go to the job aspect, more of a workplace comedy and all that. So, I mean, that could be, one of the things is, we're not really focusing in on the kids so much. We're going to focus in on, Glasgow, Coach
focusing
Keller.
On the kids in the school would be something. It could go in more of a, I know this is probably outside of your wheelhouse, ahead of a class thing, or honestly, AP Bio, which is, I think, nailing the school atmosphere of both the teachers' aspects and the students' aspects, and to me has been a much superior show than what this was before, and honestly, than where the Goldbergs is right now. The Goldbergs is starting to feel a little forced, like they've done all they can. Erica being away at college. The last episode, I don't remember if Adam was even there. They're starting to, I mean, the kids are starting to age out, which is tough. Do you remember that 70s show when Kelso left and Eric left, and they brought in Seth Meyers' brother Owen to the group, and it became very Fez-centric, and Jackie just like dated her way through the entire group of people?
Like, vaguely, like, I don't, because I remember then it was they added him, but then they also added whatever the Star of Reaper in there as well.
I don't remember that. I know that they replaced Eric's sister because unfortunately that actress had a lot of problems and passed away eventually. But it just, the whole thing was very Cousin Oliver from the Brady Bunch. It's just, oh, let's do what we can to bring in the new cute, or to keep things interesting when we've lost some of the long-term characters, especially the focus characters. And to do a spin-off show that isn't about the focus characters, it's tough. It is really tough, because is it just the also-rans? It's rare that you'll get a spin-off show that will be in the same success range as the original show. And I think even rarer is still to have them being at the same time. Like, Cheers had a couple of tries at spin-off shows. They did a Fratelli's, I want to say that they did another one, but I don't remember exactly what it was. But Frasier came out after Cheers, so it didn't have to be compared to Cheers at the same time. And it's not like you're watching Cheers and going, well, where the hell's Frasier? Oh, yeah, he's over on this other thing. It's like after Cheers, there was just Frasier, and Frasier was a completely different setting, a whole new cast of characters. Every once in a while, they bring in one of the old hats. Other shows that have done this, like Joni Loves Chachi from Happy Days, it's always tough. The Ropers off of Three's Company. But then after Three's Company ended, they did Three's a Crowd with Jack Tripper, and really wasn't any better. I look at this, and they're all, again, great people. They're very enjoyable on the Goldberg show. I've missed Lainey. It would be nice to see Lainey come back to the Goldbergs itself, but doing this is, I guess, the next best thing.
And also the last episode that you're talking about of the Goldbergs was called Flashy Little Flash Dancer, and Adam was in that one. Yeah, Adam was in that one, but it was a little bit more focused on Beverly.
It's been more focused on the parents because the kids, they're getting to their empty nest stage. Mm-hmm. The kids are all in different things and are going to be disappearing again to schools and stuff. And it's losing some of, I think, the magic of the family. I think in the Goldbergs, the family was very important.
Yeah.
So making this about the school is easier to do, although you have to age out the students every few years. It's just, we'll see. We'll see if the writing is there. And that's what I think the problem was, is in that pilot episode, the writing really wasn't there. It didn't hammer down the same kind of comedy chops that they'd done on the other show. And also, I don't know if the 90s are the same level of nostalgia as the 80s are.
Yeah, I mean, that could honestly be it too, because I mean, where there is for me with that, because I was born in 89, so I grew up in the 90s.
Right.
There is that bit of nostalgia. That's also because, you know, I don't know what it's like to go to the cinema, you know, in 1985 and, you know, and watch a movie and, you know, and just stay in the movie theater for a whole day. And that's because that was when my mom was in high school.
I think it's because the 90s haven't really disappeared yet. Your average alternative station, and alternative stations started coming out in the 90s to the early 2000s. Your average alternative station still plays the same fucking music as they were. Now, there are 80s stations, of course, so all that music still exists too. But you don't hear it in the common, like, modern radio stations in the same way that you still will hear your Nirvana, your Chili Peppers, your Beastie Boys, that stuff that was in the 90s. Like, it should have cycled out. I don't think the 90s ever cycled out. The other thing is that the fashion trends of the 80s were so crazy. Everything about the 80s was just fucking insane. And I believe it was probably because of all the cocaine usage, because we were just so rich and broke because of cocaine. But the 80s were, like, creatively, just like, movies were huge spectacles still. And I don't mean blockbusters, but I mean that there was just something new about them. And again, like, in that mid 80s time, you had your Ghostbusters, you had your ET, you had your Back to the Futures and all these things. And it was like the heyday for Spielberg, and Lucas wasn't the devil yet. And all of these things that really stood out. And I felt like the 90s was when we were seeing sequelitis to a heavy degree. That's when we got the third Terminator, which just, you're like, Terminator 2, sure, great. But Terminator 3, no. And anything past that, really, with Terminator has been a lot of nope.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's when we lost our love for Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so what did we get? We got hip hop, but it wasn't even as cool as, like, the rap of the 80s battles and stuff. It just, I'm not saying it went to shit, but it just became a far less interesting field. And again, doesn't feel so far away from now. As weird as it is to say that we're 18 years into the 2000s, so it's been 19 years since the 90s even were a thing. You always kind of, that first 10 years of the 2000s, you just forget about, and you're like, oh yeah, 90s were only 10 years ago. No.
Well, but it's like I think even then though, it's because even in the, like, because we probably should start getting that nostalgia of the 90s, because of the fact that, like you said, there is a decade in between, much like in the 2000s. Well, no, because I mean, actually, I take that back, because, you know, you look at in the 2000s, you know, in the early aughts, as it's called, we had that 70s show. And what did that 70s show have in there? It had 2 generations in between it. It had
we also had that 80s show.
But that only lasted 1 season.
Yeah, because it was bad. It was a terrible, terrible show.
Yeah. So I mean, it didn't have like part of me thinks that.
But we have Fresh Off the Boat, which has been doing 90s. We had that show a few years back. I think when we started doing shows together, the one on VH1 where the woman's relationship broke up and she knocked herself out in the elevator and woke up back in time in the 90s and fucked up every relationship over 3 times.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I never dated you. Well, I'm going to bang you. Oops. Well, that was stupid. That just ruined everything and made my friend mad at me. All right, so I'm going to go bang this other guy. Oops, that just ruined everything and made my friend mad at me again. Like, first of all, your friend's kind of a bitch. And but just in general, like the fashion of that, it made you like, oh yeah, this fashion was really cool. Like, I still fucking wear flannel shirts all the time. That it was a 90s thing, but it wasn't really a 90s thing. It's just that's just what shit people wear.
Yeah.
Doc Martens, just shit people wear. There was nothing extraordinary about it. It may have been like we did it a little too much, but nothing really stood out. The biggest thing of the 90s was probably like The Real World.
Yeah.
It was the first decade of reality TV as we perceive it today.
Well, and I would even say with the 90s that it was a lot of it was the hair, because I mean you're describing that. Immediately I go to Boy Meets World, and it's like you look at like it was Sean's hair, how it was all, it was always long and similar to how your hair is now when it's not pulled back.
Oh yeah, like the creepy factor that I did on the weekend.
Yeah,
like Bob from Twin Peaks. No, that's I will give you the best description of hair in the 90s. Every shitty wig that they give Arrow to wear in that show is like every bad 90s haircut. That is what he looks like. It's like, oh fuck, they put another wig on Oliver. It's so awful. Yet they all must be from the Boy Meets World throw off cast.
Yeah. Or but one of my favorite episodes from rewatching Boy Meets World when it's on reruns like wherever is the episode where Eric's on Singled Out, and they have Chris Hardwick, they do before rehab and at midnight Chris Hardwick, where he's like, hey, nice hair at the end. Like, it's like such a bullshit little line, but yet it works.
Yeah.
And stuff. That was a quick story. That wasn't quick. But there is a segue here. And that is that a comic book that is set in the 80s, but came out, in the 2000s, Deadly Class, written by Rick Remender and drawn by Wes Craig, is set to come to Syfy. They ordered a pilot of the show, and the other big part here is the Russo brothers are set to be on board as well.
Didn't it say that they've committed to 10 episodes already? Yeah, that's what I think the story was, because I thought we talked about this, and that's why I didn't put the story into the doc, was I thought we talked about this being a possibility before, and I thought we even talked about the Russos being involved in it, but this is the clarification of, oh yeah, we've done the pilot and we've decided we're going to go ahead with it, so it's going to actually land as a series. Which if you're Syfy, I mean, how hard are your nipples if you get the Russo brothers to do a show for you?
Yeah,
right now
the Russo brothers are executive producing alongside Rick Remender, who is Miles Orion Feldsatz. They're both adapting the series, and then they're both executive producing alongside the Russo brothers and Mike LaRocca. Now, this is the one part where I get, because, the Russos are really busy, but it seems like, okay, if you could have, they don't have the Russos directing the pilot, and not to take anything away from Lee Talland Krieger, but it's like you see that title of, oh, the Russos are attached onto here, but they're not directing. You sort of go, wait, what?
Didn't they direct that episode of Community where they did the elevator scene that was straight out of Captain America 2?
Yeah.
They were already making it big, and then they came back and still did that. I thought that was terrific. So there's a chance. There's a chance that if they've got the time, which I don't imagine that they'll have for quite a while, they could come in and do something themselves if they're so inclined to. Because just from that moment, just from the fact that they got their start in things like Community, they seem like cool guys. But there's the potential. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what Deadly Class is?
Well, so Deadly Class is one that I didn't really get into So I don't know a lot about it, but what I will say real quick before, because I think you know a little bit more about it than I do.
Not really. Yeah.
But it stars it'll star Benedict Wong, who played Wong in Doctor Strange. You know, he'll star alongside Benjamin Wadsworth, Lana Condor, Maria Gabriela de Faria.
Did you say Lama Condor?
Lana Condor.
Oh, okay. It was. Yeah. It's still a cool name. Lana Condor is a badass name, actually. Lama Condor is just kind of funny and awesome. Yeah.
Lana Condor, do you know who she is?
Nope.
Did you see the last X-Men movie, with the 80s X-Men, with Jubilee?
I've tried to stab my eyes out from it, so yeah.
She plays Jubilee. Yep.
Okay, so to step back for a second, I have not enjoyed the last several X-Men movies, but there was a cut scene from the movie where they had Cyclops, Jean Grey, Jubilee, and the young Nightcrawler hanging out at the mall. And that scene was terrific. And that scene was what I would have really loved to see more of in the movie. And the fact that they made that shows that somebody thought some cool shit up and went so far as to shoot it and everything. And I don't know whose hand decided, like, no, let's get rid of that shit and do all this other dumb fucking crap with everything else. But that scene itself was like so 100% what I'd love to see from any X-Men movie going forward. Because it was just so much fun, and it reminded me of reading the X-Men in the 80s, and they did a couple issues. They did specifically the issue where Jubilee was introduced in Uncanny X-Men, which was all about the women characters when they were all hiding in Australia, and most of the people thought they were dead, hanging out at the mall. I would love to see that kind of stuff, like the X-Men playing baseball at the mansion like they always used to do. They always had ball games every year. That kind of stuff is what I loved in the X-Men, and the characterization, which just seems to be missing from the films for me. Because the films treat them all interchangeably. They don't care whose powers belong to who or who acts like what or why Mystique's there 1,000 times over when she shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I know that star power is important, but man, like, it was just this whiff of what we could have had and missed.
Oh, definitely.
And what I think Deadpool has excelled at so far, getting to be silly and fun, everything. It's a very different character, and it's not going to be the same kind of stories as what X-Men films should be. But it was still like, God damn it, that was so good. So for her part in that, I appreciate her.
Yeah. So that's where I said, do you know who she is? Because here, there's a couple other ones here. Luke Tenney, Liam James, who you will know as young Sean Spencer from Psych.
Was he the one that was in
the last other one I know of that he was in was 2012, that disaster porn movie?
Yeah. There were two young Sean Spencers.
Yeah, he's the one from the way back. That's the one you're referring to.
Okay.
The Steve Carell movie, yeah. And then Michael Duvall. But yeah, Deadly Class, honestly, it's an Image comic book. So that's another cool thing is we're getting more, like, we're seeing the TV companies, and the production companies diving more into Image comics instead of just what's Marvel and DC got for us. It's it's like, oh hey, there's other comic book publishers out there. Basically, it's set in the 80s, follows a homeless teen being recruited into an elite private school where every crime family in the world sends their kids. He must survive a ruthless curriculum and social cliques while trying to maintain his moral code.
It's a little bit X-Men, it's a little bit Wanted, and a little bit Kingsman. So it's two Mark Miller things, which were all Mark Miller stuff is ripped off from other comics anyways, and it's very X-Men-ish as well because of it's the whole class aspect of it. Yeah. But I read the first issue. I remember seeing it. It was just at the time that I was like hitting my point of stepping away from comics, both because of financial reasons and just because there was a lot of stuff going on in comics that was just kind of underwhelming to me. And I'm not saying that this book was that, but I was just kind of had my fill and I needed to take a break for a few years, which I still haven't gotten past, but it's more the financial thing, I think, at this point.
Yeah. And there's, for those of you guys who want to read the source material before it comes out, there are 5 volumes from Image Comics. There have been 30 issues, which I'm finding a little weird that the Deadly Class Volume 5 here. This is according to Wikipedia. Stops at issue 26. So I'm like, wait a minute. There is a series of Volume 6 trade paperback. It came out in December of this past year. But yeah, I mean, definitely check that out. It sounds great. So on the other side, on the DC Comics side, hot off the heels of that Ready Player One, which, did you hear that that's a thing, a movie, based on, a bunch of Steven Spielberg movies directed by Steven Spielberg? You heard that,
right? I heard that he tried not to make it about Steven Spielberg as much, and then people were like, yeah, that would work if you weren't Steven fucking Spielberg. Yeah. Maybe you should have sat out some shit in the 80s if you're gonna be that way. Didn't leave a lot of room for other ones, Dick. We kind of have to put your shit in here.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people are gonna be really confused. Like, wow, is this an alternate universe world where Howard the Duck was a hit? And
well, it's also funny because of the fact that I believe it was for rights issues. They changed in the big final battle. They changed what would have been the Japanese Spider-Man's mech Leopard into the Iron Giant.
Right.
So it's like you could have done any other giant, thing, made it Optimus Prime or anything like that you possibly could have gotten, the rights to. But instead you're like, let's do this one.
Well, let's do that one. And I'm going to speak on behalf of people who have seen the Iron Giant and love it. We're not going to get an Iron Giant 2.
No.
Face facts, Iron Giant ends pretty much like, that's it. It's a one and done. But it's so wonderful.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's not.
And so beloved. And I know not the biggest hit in the world, although I think it's found much more of a following going forward. Mm-hmm. Man, if that's the only chance we ever get to see the Iron Giant on the big screen again, then thank you for doing it.
No, yeah. I'm not knocking that at all. I'm just saying, hey, that's, one of the biggest things in there. But the big thing with this is the article points out, that hot off the heels of Ready Player One, Steven Spielberg is diving into the DC universe proper with Blackhawk. This will be a film. So far, with reading through this article, I haven't seen any of the words to make me shudder, and that would be them trying to link this to the DCEU. I'm just thinking, okay, here, I think would be pretty hard with how this is, this is Blackhawk is a wartime adventure series.
Yeah, not to confuse anybody, Blackhawk was not the winged co-pilot friend of the first black superhero, Black Lightning, over in the DC universe. Blackhawks were a team of fighter pilots in the World War II era comics of DC around the same time as we were having Sergeant Fury. No, not Fury. Sorry, that's Marvel. Sergeant Rock at DC. World War II Enemy Ace, I think. There were some other ones. The Losers, the original Losers, that the Vertigo comic that became a movie later on was sort of based off of the same ideas. But there were a few other ones. But yeah, so a lot of war comics in that era, of course, because there was a lot of wars. And the Blackhawks were part of that. Now, one of the characters, Lady Blackhawk, who's introduced later on in the series, she actually continued on into the modern continuity and became the pilot for the Birds of Prey series. I want to say when Gail Simone was writing it. May have been when Chuck Dixon was on there, but I believe that she was a big part of it when Gail was doing it. Was a fantastic character, just fun, could drink anybody under the table, and wasn't as much in the superheroing stuff, but was just a great voice to add to that group. So not a lot of interactions with DC superheroes that we know of.
Yeah.
So you're right. I don't know that this is going to be we're going to do this and then it's going to lead right into the Black Adam movie finally that's been talked about for years.
But at the same time, I look at it and I go, this is something that could, I'm using air quotes around there, be tied in, but in the looser sense, more in the Arrowverse sense, where if you look at, whenever anyone in the Arrowverse shows needs to go to an airfield, what is it always? Ferris Air. And,
right.
It's these little Easter eggy things that they could put in there that.
I mean, we could easily tie Wonder Woman into this because we know that she's around at that time since she gets established in World War I. That's something that they could do in post, like, because we know that our next movie is supposed to be in the 80s, not the 90s.
And that's mainly because she had some bad costumes in the 90s.
But oh yeah, she did. Wow. She had some bad costumes in the 70s though, and
yeah,
completely. Kung Fu Wonder Woman was a weird phase of that character. So there's possibilities, but I don't know that that's something that Spielberg's like, I want to jump in it. Like, we know Scorsese's talking about doing a Joker movie, but his Joker movie is meant to be separate from all of the DC shared universe continuity, and I expect that this would be the same thing. It sounds like it's something he could have come up with on his own and just done with anything, but he was a fan of the property and has been a fan of the property for a long time.
Well, in the article here, it also says, he mentions the fact that it's Warner Brothers that did it. Spielberg noted, this is from the article, Spielberg noted, it was wonderful working with the team at Warner Brothers to bring Ready Player One to the screen. They bring a blend of passion and professionalism to everything they do and have a tremendous history in this genre. I'm excited to reunite with them on Blackhawk. So that honestly tells me, it's, I'm not taking away that it couldn't be that he was a fan of Blackhawk, growing up, but that the people that he was working with, he really enjoyed, seeing them and stuff.
Well, yeah, he just explored the sort of comic book nerdity in Ready Player One. Two, he's done Indiana Jones and is working on a fifth one currently. Indiana Jones is very era linked to this kind of storytelling. It makes sense in all ways. If you're going to pick a DC property, this is a good property for him to come into, especially if it's not hugely tied to everything else, so he doesn't have to work out like, oh, how do we lead this into the next DC film and give a shared universe thing, and when Darkseid's finger kind of come reaching through the fucking screen at them. And there's still a lot of fun here, but it takes the onus off of him to try to create a new property. It's going to give that added kick of there is people out there who already understand who these characters are. So it does have, I'll say probably a limited at this point in time because it hasn't been published in so long, but an existing fan base. So he doesn't have to like pretend, because they could have done something like Sky Captain in the World Tomorrow, which is very neat, but didn't catch on with the audience. It might have been too ahead of its time. But if anything, it's probably going to be closer to like Speed Racer.
Yeah.
Which is Speed Racer was a property that hadn't been around for years. There was certainly a huge amount of old fans who were nostalgic for the thing and had seen reruns and stuff when they played on Cartoon Network. But Speed Racer also didn't do very well. And I think it's probably, after The Matrix, one of the Wachowskis' best films. Maybe their best films after the original Matrix. Just didn't catch the audience at that point. But I think, again, we look at it in hindsight and we're like, oh, that's actually pretty solid.
Yeah.
Because it's true to the characters. It's a fun movie. It's just visually, it was unusual, and I don't know that the audience knew how to react to it at that point.
I think
this is good. Yeah. If DC has a lot of properties that they should get out there, that they could have fun with, and if they find the right people who have a genuine interest towards those things, and I mean a real interest towards what the property is, not just like, oh, I want to shoot a movie about people who fly, so I'm going to use Hawkman, and I'm going to get rid of all the Thanagar stuff, which I've kind of done in Hawkman sometimes too. And I'm going to get rid of all the Carter Hall and timeless Shara Carter stuff, which they've kind of done sometimes too. And I'm just going to do this thing where they've all got hawk wings, but instead they all come up from the ocean, and like people would be pissed because it's not Hawkman.
Yeah.
In this case, it sounds like this is Spielberg saying, hey, this is a movie that I want to do, and I'm kind of prone to doing well. And it's a property that I actually like and I'm familiar with and know and would like to do these actual characters. That could work out great. If DC can land other stuff like that, if they can do a Sergeant Rock war movie if they can do things that aren't all tied into the overarching connected universe, because not all that stuff should go together or should work together, just like they can do Vertigo movies and stuff and not have them all have to tie into this stuff. They should absolutely do it. I think that's terrific.
The last bit of news is that Paramount is teaming with F. Gary Gray to turn Mask into a film franchise. Now, before we get started,
Rocky Dennis story, finally, it's the trilogy I've always wanted. Cher's not dead yet. She can come out of retirement, come back, play the same person. We can get Eric Stoltz, and that's what we're talking about, right? Mask, the guy with the lion face.
I was going to do the joke of the Jim Carrey movie.
No, nobody wants to do that joke because that already happened.
Yeah.
And it was terrible.
Well, yeah,
Son of Mask was,
yeah, but that was also mainly because that was Jamie Kennedy. Yeah.
I think Jamie Kennedy can be good in things sometimes before. I don't know. Isn't he in the new Tremors? I feel like he's been like hanging out with Michael Gross in the Tremors movies.
I think so. But I mean, I'm going to say something that might irritate people, and I'm not going to do it. Because I was just going to compare Tremors to Sharknado, which I do not like Sharknado. I do not get the hype over Sharknado.
I don't get the hype over Sharknado, other than the fact that I think it was a surprise when the first one happened. Like, oh, this is campy, but in the right ways. Yeah, and they got the campiest actors in the right ways, and they all knew what it was, and they didn't try to make it something else.
You mean the campiest actors, aka the actors from a lot of teen comedy movies from the late 80s and early 2000s. Well,
we got 90210 with the insert, but yeah,
and Tara Reid, who hadn't been in anything in a while.
They did Sharknado, and they didn't try to make it serious.
Yeah,
they went full on into it, like what Bruce Campbell was doing with the Army of Darkness stuff at that point, and that gave it something that the other sci-fi movies weren't doing, which is just, we know this is stupid, so let's just have a great old fucking time with it. And they did, and that's why it was okay. I don't know that it earned 5 movies, but probably Tremors hasn't either. But you keep going back for the nostalgia of it. It's fine. The first Tremors was great. Yeah. The ones after that have been progressively not as great, but there's still a chance he can come back. Plus, Kevin Bacon is actually supposed to be doing a Tremors series. He'll be returning to the role. It's too bad Fred Ward's not around.
To get back to the original article that we were talking about here, the MASC stands for Mobile Armored Strike Command.
Command with a K.
Yes.
Always the right way to go when you decide you're gonna do your anagram or whatever, and you're like, yeah, it's gonna say this. Well, that doesn't work at all. Yeah, well, we don't care.
But this is based off of the 80s Kenner action figures and the animated series, where it was a task force led by Matt Tracker, whose goal is to take out the criminal organization Venom, all in upper, cap lock letters. The film was will be produced by Hasbro and Gray, and they're just, they're plugging away, getting a writer and all that. And it mentioned here, because we talked about this before, of like you didn't recognize F. Gary Gray, only saying because the article says that, he was in the, he directed The Fate of the Furious and Straight Outta Compton, and he'll be doing the Men in Black reboot that will star Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson. And it wasn't until I pointed out his other films. He hasn't done a lot, but he's been, started out in 95 with feature films, where he directed the first Friday movie. And
the first Friday movie is pretty good. I've seen the sequels a lot more because they played them in cable a lot in the break room when I was working retail. But obviously the first one with Chris Tucker is very good. And you said he did the Italian Job remake, which is one of those movies that I know is not good, but I love it and I rewatch it whenever it's on. I can't not watch it. It's the only Mark Wahlberg movie that I allow myself, I think. And I'm so in love with it. I don't know why.
And also the let's not forget that same year he did the movie A Man Apart, the 2003 American vigilante action film starring Vin Diesel and Lorenz Tate. I just recognize that movie because that was one of those I think my sister was really into. Like, she was into a lot of those, a lot of like those types of movies, and I'm like, all right, cool.
Vin Diesel's emotional side.
Yeah.
Which I can't make fun of because his emotional side is what part of what makes me love Iron Giant so much.
Yeah. And then also, of course, Be Cool, which was, as we talked about in the pre-show, one of The Rock's big breakout roles outside of, hey, I'm going to do an action movie.
Yeah, The Rock playing something that was against type.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Be Cool. I'm a very big fan of Get Shorty. Be Cool was the sequel, but I don't know how much Elmore Leonard was actually involved in that one. And a lot of people say that it's not as good, but The Rock is supposedly very funny in his part in it. Back to the Mask show, because you're not familiar with it, because again, this is the 80s, and you were born in 89. So, like we were talking about earlier with what set the 80s apart, in the 80s, man, shows about cool vehicles were huge. And that's going back to the 70s too. You have your Knight Rider, which is a talking car. You have your Dukes of Hazzard, which is the show about a racist car. And you have I'm kidding, but not really. we didn't know. We didn't understand. We didn't know the generally. We didn't get it. We were just kids. We just thought the car was cool. Oh, the doors are welded shut, so you have to get in through the windows. How awesome, for no reason at all. It's like, really? Because opening doors works fine. That doesn't make it cooler. It was just the jumping across the creek all the time that made it cool.
Exactly.
Duke. Yeah. Exactly.
Because that's I tell you right now, dude. I tried that, but again, being a bigger kid, I so tried to do that all the time because Dukes of Hazzard were always on repeat.
Yeah.
And it's like, I would try to get in there, and Mom and Grandma were just like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm trying to be like the Duke boys. Leave me alone." And I know in the back of her head, like, "But you're fat." It wasn't like in a heartful way. It was like, you're gonna get stuck, and then I'm gonna have to help you, and that's not gonna be possible because you outweigh me, sort of thing. I never got stuck though.
But yeah, in the 80s, we also got the DeLorean in Back to the Future. We had the A-Team van. We had a lot of cool vehicle stuff. So Mask was about a team of guys that they wore these helmets, and the helmets gave them certain abilities, but then they also drove these vehicles, and the vehicles would transform. And I'm using transform very, very loosely because Matt Tracker's car was like a Trans Am looking thing that it had the suicide doors that would pop up, but then because they would pop up, suddenly it could fly. And it made no sense as far as physics. And of course, he's flying around with the doors wide open. So the bad guys, who I believe were Venom in the show, could shoot at him. There was nothing protecting him at all. Random pigeon could have taken that motherfucker down as long as it was a face shot, because in the face, he's wearing the helmet. But that's all it was. People wearing elaborate helmets that gave them some sort of ability, but it seemed like all of that shit really just came down to, we're all driving these weird, cool vehicles. And then Tracker had a son that would ride around in the scooter, and the scooter would turn into a robot, or the robot would turn into the scooter. So it was like the same bullshit of like, I'm your fucking nanny, and I'm annoying as shit. It's your Orko / Snarf crap. Yeah. but I'll turn into a scooter and you can sit on my butt. And weird. But that's what the fucking show, all it was.
Yeah.
Vehicles against vehicles, which is what G.I. Joe was, except G.I. Joe had actual characters that you could recognize and do shit. And honestly, part of the Hasbro group that they're supposed to be they were trying to make a shared universe between Transformers, G.I. Joe, Mask, I think Visionaries, which is even worse. We'll get into Visionaries someday. And maybe a couple other properties. I want to say Pound Puppies, but not really. But I do. Mask is it was beloved because as far as the cartoons that you came home after school and saw every day, the quality was better. I mean, it was always like you'd come home and you had to sit through the Filmation Ghostbusters cartoon, which was not based off of the movies. It was based off the old Ghostbusters movie from like the black and white phase, where they had a gorilla that hung out with them in this old jalopy thing. It was so awful. All the Filmation stuff was bad. You have to sit through that. You'd have to sit through GoBots, and you wouldn't want to see GoBots. You want to see Transformers, but Transformers weren't on until like 5:30. GoBots were on at 3:30 when you got home, so you have to sit through the fucking GoBots. GoBots were terrible. The toys are terrible. The cartoon was awful. The robots blinked their eyes. They animated robots blinking their eye. Someone decided this and then went through the hard work process of hand-drawn animation to make the robots in GoBots cartoons blink their fucking eyes. That does not make any sense. Even in the 80s, I was just like, I'm 10 and you're an asshole. All right? That's what I'm telling you, TV. You're an asshole for doing this. I should rip that fucking antenna off of you, which I did to beat my friend with it. Anyway, Mask, as far as quality, was a step up from that. It wasn't as cool as a Thundercats Silverhawks, which, looking back, those had some problems too. That Robot Bears episode, man. But it was pretty good and a much nicer thing to get to watch than some of those other lower rate programs. But it was dumb. It was even as a kid, it's like, sure. I mean, flying car, yeah, all day. Dig me a flying car. But maybe not this flying car.
Yeah.
You know? And you're just a guy in a jumpsuit and a big helmet. I don't really feel like I'm getting much from the superheroics out of it. But it could be cool. I mean, updating it could be a lot more fun. And this would be one of those things where they could have used the bullshit hypersuits that they used in the first G.I. Joe movie that made no sense in G.I. Joe. It's like, hey, we're a couple military trained guys and we're going to put on these fucking suits that are going to make us like really fast and bulletproof and run around and look like we're moving the same way as Transformers did, because nobody's sick of that yet, right? We were sick of it before it came out. And Marlon Wayans. Why?
So Dave
is work.
Yeah. So Dave Nelson is asking the very important question.
Tasteful Dave Nelson.
Yes, Tasteful Dave Nelson. Dangerous Dave Nelson. I'm trying to think of other radio personas that he's shared that he's used in the past. He asks, what about Superbus? Now, I did a Google search while you were talking. I could not find a thing. The only thing I found was a 1976 movie called The Big Bus.
I think Dave is just high. Maybe he's talking about Megabus? No, there's a band, Superbus.
Well, I have no idea, because again, this is the pre my time thing. But what I would say is,
I think it's from Dave in the early 70s or something, hanging out in a Volkswagen bus, eating some cool brownies, and coming up with his own concepts. Or it's any time that Fred banged Velma and Daphne in the back of the Mystery Machine.
And actually he is saying it's the big bus, but no. So like from hearing your description on Mask, it probably would have been one of those shows that I would have watched and loved as a kid, because I loved, some dumb, stupid shows. Like looking back on them now, like Big Bad Beetleborgs, I was like, yeah, I'm all for that. When and I was still at a Power Rangers, but it was more like, but these ones, because they're Beatles, it's
well,
like,
I've got to say the Fast and the Furious movies, I haven't seen The Fate of the Furious, the latest one that this gentleman directed.
Yeah. But
I sat through 7, and the ignorance of physics in that movie, it's so close to what Mask should be. And if they make a Mask movie and they aim it towards kids and not try to adult it up like, oh, here's Megan Fox showing almost boob, they actually do something that could be for the appropriate age group instead of trying to deck it out to be like for adults and make it cool. It could be a really fun movie.
Yeah.
And it could be the right move for this guy to be in charge of that. Because again, the Italian Job, way silly, way over the line silly. Don't take any of it seriously at all. But it's fun.
Yeah.
This could be fun. I'd like to see the property work out. And there's not a lot to be beholden to because, again, it's 30 years old.
So that is going to do it for the news, and we will be right back with the ElseViews. And we are back, and it is time for the ElseViews, and this is the portion of the show where we're going to talk about, the TV shows, movies, video games, basically whatever that we have been watching or, and consuming over the past week that we want to share with you. So HBO released a documentary last Wednesday about Andre the Giant. I mentioned this because, my love for wrestling, it is one of the things that I've loved. But Andre the Giant is one of those few people, like to think up a list of people that have transcended the world of professional wrestling. I would probably say, Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan,
Roddy Piper.
Ultimate Warrior was close, but not
Dwayne The Rock Johnson, who we were just talking about.
Well, no, I was getting to it. I was working chronologically, but yeah, the
Iron Sheik, if you follow his Twitter.
Yeah, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, and John Cena. Those are
and Junkyard Dog, if you follow the unemployment line.
He's standing right next to the Brooklyn Brawler. Happy birthday, Brooklyn Brawler, by the way. I'm saying this on his birthday. I feel like a dick.
But I don't know why I'm dissing Junkyard Dog. You be you, man. Grab them cakes.
But no, so this was the Andre the Giant documentary that aired on HBO that they were advertising for a long time on WWE, I think since the Royal Rumble. And I had seen other documentaries before. I know A&E had done a documentary on it, on Andre the Giant, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. But watching this, now, did you see the documentary or?
I did not. I've noticed that they did it, and it was 2 parts, right?
Oh, no, it was all 1 part.
It felt like I saw it. It was one of those things that they did like a part 1 and a part 2. And then they, like right after, by a couple of days, they did this Elvis Presley documentary where they've done 2 parts, and they had just recently done a Gary Shandling.
Yeah, I know they had done a Gary Shandling one. Judd Apatow.
Okay, so maybe that's why I thought it was 2 parts. As I remember it was Shandling.
Yeah, because Gary Shandling, the Gary Shandling one, actually, Judd Apatow did that one by he found a bunch of Gary's journals and stuff, and that one was one that interested me. But but this one, obviously interested me because of my love for wrestling. And actually, as you see, where I have a fake title belt here, I got fake title belts over there and stuff. But the interesting part with this wasn't because it does goes through the year from birth to his death, and it gave insight to some of the big moments. So with the filming of Princess Bride, and just how bad his body, how he was, bad a shape that he was in, with Robin Wright, where she says that they had to rig her up in a harness to lower her down for that scene where she's falling, and he catches her, so he did not have to carry her weight and not, because for what a lot of people don't realize, he when he started wrestling at 18, and he had essentially what's called giantism, where his body kept growing, his body and organs kept growing, even after he was in his 30s and past, when he was 43, I believe, and he was growing up into that part. And they talked about the territories at the time in America, where you had like Michigan had its territory, and you had Deep South Wrestling, Mid South Wrestling, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation up in New York, basically along the Eastern Seaboard right there, all of New England was the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and how it was Vincent J. McMahon, so Vince McMahon's dad, that I guess showed Andre the Giant the most respect, and it's where he was, I'm working for you, but you're going to do all my booking and stuff, and Vince Sr. would actually loan him out to these other areas and stuff. And he always had the same matches. He talked about his favorite matches were the Battle Royale, because, that's just him throwing, people out and stuff. Yeah. And then handicap matches where it would be him versus 2 people and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, yeah, because he was just so big. One of the interesting things, honestly, was early on, they talked about his fighting style being more, being a lot quicker and stuff. Not being what you typically see now with he's a big guy, so it's all power, and he's gonna maybe raise a leg to knock a person down, but he's gonna use his body and stuff, where he actually moved around and stuff. I'm like, that's awesome to hear, because he was, when he started wrestling, I think he was 6'9", I think, and then he by the time he passed, he was, I think, 7'4", 7'5". But then you get into they start talking about some of the tragedies Like, it's interesting. They had interviews with Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair. Actually, Ric Flair would be one of those I would put on that list of, having the crossover, but more in because of what he did outside of wrestling, and just the persona that he has. And Teddy White, or no, Teddy Long, no, yeah, Teddy White, who was his handler and was later on referee for the WWF. There was a part in the documentary where Hulk Hogan talks about flying to Japan with Andre, and they show a picture of Andre, in 2 seats and stuff, and you could tell that he and like how he felt bad for Andre because Andre the Giant couldn't use the regular bathroom. Like, they had to close the curtain. He relieved himself into a bucket, and they dumped the bucket into the bathroom that way.
Yeah, it's unlikely that someone the size of Andre the Giant would even be allowed on a commercial flight these days.
Yeah.
I remember when they kicked Kevin Smith off a few years ago, and he's just normal fat. Well, not anymore.
It was interesting to see with a wrestler nowadays, the Big Show, who he's very close to Andre the Giant size. Like he's, I think 7'3" or 7'1", 7'3". And when they started doing the WWE started doing the, and you notice I switched between E and F. That's because of the time frame of when they switched. Were
when the World Wildlife Fund said enough of your shit.
Yeah, which I watched a video on that, and it was fairly interesting, but not the point. But when they started doing tribute to the troops thing, and they were going overseas, there was a picture, there's video of the Big Show, like just laying on, instead of sitting in seats, he's laying on stuff that's strapped down and stuff, and it's like, wow, this is the size of this man. And that doesn't even compare to Andre the Giant, because Andre the Giant, I believe, had a couple inches on him, and at this point in time had, I think they weighed about the same. But Hogan also talked about the fact that when he left, Andre the Giant would just out. He's done with the, he's wanting to get out. And so Hulk Hogan, who himself is a big man, he's not Andre the Giant big, but still he is, I'll put it this way, he would stick out in a lineup of a bunch of normal people, and he hears these people talking about Andre the Giant, just going like, and it's not really good. It's like, oh man, you see him? Oh my gosh, I wonder how, it's stuff like that. And it's just like, oh my gosh, people can be dicks. But the documentary is really good. They go in depth into his humor. Like, it was, because they talk a lot with Teddy White, his, it's called his handler in here, and how back in the day when he was selling merchandise for the WWE or WWF, and he was going into the locker room, and there was a rule back then that only the referees and the wrestlers were allowed in the locker room. And so he went in there, and then you just hear, he says how Andre the Giant just goes, "Get out!" And he looks at him like, "But I work for you guys." He was like, "Get the fuck out!" And like that, and just dominated his, just commanded respect in there, and then eventually became friendly. But then they get talking about the WrestleMania 3 main event at Pontiac, at the Pontiac Silverdome, and how Hulk Hogan, who at this time, because Andre had been out with some knee surgeries and back surgeries, Hulk Hogan had really taken off, and had sort of become the face of professional wrestling at this point, where he was so afraid of Andre the Giant. Like, he had written down how he wanted the match to go, because, spoiler alert, the matches are planned. I hate to.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're pointing out all these fake trophy belts you have. I'm like, well, they're all kind of fake trophy belts, really. But
yeah, but it's like he pointed out, like basically his ideas for how this match would run, and he goes to Vincent K. McMahon, the current CEO of WWE, and goes, "Hey, just this is my idea, for what I have here, and all that, and just pass it on to the boss man, to Andre." And he was asking, from the weeks and weeks up, like, hey, so you got any ideas? Oh, we'll worry about that later. We'll worry about that later. Just basically Andre just pushing it off, picking on Hulk Hogan, just tormenting him because he had already committed, which Hogan didn't know. He had already committed to that match. He liked that match. So we get to WrestleMania and he starts doing this stuff and Hogan's like, oh, okay, he's doing my script. And then they changed a little bit because Hogan did his best to work with the limitations that Andre had. Like
right.
if you watch in a lot of the wrestling matches in the later part of his life, he's holding on to the ropes or he's holding on to his opponent throughout most of it, just for balance. And Andre, he goes, he they're in a lockup and he just goes slam, and Hulk Hogan then picks him up, slams him, and he goes leg drop, and all that. Like it's beautiful when you read biographies about this, about how they call it. It makes the matches so poetic because like I even as a fan now, I try to see if I can see the parts where they're going, where they're talking and saying, okay, this like this now, and I very rarely catch it. But it's just beautiful to see this and how it happened, and hitting on the human side part of Andre the Giant, hitting on his home his home away from home, because he was born in France, in North Carolina. I think it was North Carolina. It's like the small little town where you would see him at the bar because no one, he said it was his favorite place because one, it reminded him of home in France, and two, no one took a second glance. They're just like, oh, that's just Andre. It wasn't. Right. That was Andre the Giant. That was just, oh, that's Andre Rusimov. It went a lot deeper than the A&E biography did, because the biography more just focused on the wrestling side. It didn't really focus in on what he, some of the things that he went through. But again, one of the things I loved, talked about the humor, including an in-depth, borderline graphic reenactment from Hulk Hogan of how when they would be on private planes or in elevators, that would be Andre the Giant's, like, Andre loved a fart joke, and so he would just decide to just let him rip. And Hogan talks about how he heard the airline pilots, at the private jets just go, oh my gosh, and he would just, how he's saying, you just hear like the sound of skin just slapping together and stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like I should be, this is disgusting but yet hilarious at the same time. Like, to how, like, and it just made me think of how funny this guy was and how he knew, he had that comedic timing and stuff, and it was great. I loved it. But yeah, check it out. It's on HBO. If you're a Comcast subscriber right now, it is their watchathon, to where you can actually watch this for free right now and all that. So I highly recommend it. But yeah, it is over on HBO. Either HBO Go, HBO Now, HBO When. It's on all those things. So Corey, you got anything you want to add to the ElseViews?
It's funny because I've been going through, I'm rewatching tiny home shows during my lunch breaks. Mm-hmm. Ones that I've seen before. I don't even know if they're still doing tiny home shows as much anymore, which is, I haven't good.
Seen them as often.
No, I feel like it was something that was out for a little bit, and people went, wow, these people are really dumb. I don't hate watch things generally, but I definitely hate watch tiny home shows because of the people who are just like, yeah, I've got 3 kids and 4 dogs and a bird sanctuary, and we're thinking 160 square feet. It's just like, you should die. You should absolutely die. I hope your animals eat you and then move into a bigger place when they're all fattened up. But one thing, the reason why I'm watching that right now is because I've run out of the other shows that I was watching. I was watching Good Eats for the last year or so, and I was looking for something to replace Good Eats during my lunch breaks, and I was kind of sticking with the food theme. There are 2 things that I've watched on Netflix that were recommended to me. And this was the first one. It's a series called Ugly Delicious. Mm-hmm. It is a docuseries about food, and it kind of goes through each episode is about something different. So the first episode is about pizza, and they run through, like, it starts out in a very fine dining pizzeria place, like not fine dining, like overly stylized or anything, but it's like the epitome of pizza in New York.
Yeah.
You know, one of those places where this guy, that's all he does. He excels at it. He has very specific rules as to what constitutes a pizza. Like, you don't put seafood on pizza. You don't do these things. Like, pizza is this, and it's New York style versus Chicago style, and those types of things. But then they go to other places. They go across the country. They go in other countries. They go to Italy. They jump around, and they look at pizza from different cultures. And they do look at somebody who's putting oysters or clams, I think, like in the shell on pizza, and does that constitute pizza? And then one thing that they do is they order Domino's to that pizza restaurant because the main guy, who is a award-winning chef, he's like, yeah, but sometimes, because I grew up with it, I just want Domino's. And so they order to the restaurant, and they're sitting there and they're eating it. And he's like, so do you think this is a pizza? He's like, I don't know what the fuck this is, but you never order this shit to my place again, or I'll kill you. It's just,
does he say that?
Oh yeah, he absolutely does. But it's just like, that's kind of the whole theme of the show. One of them is I'm trying to remember what some of the other ones were, but they definitely go through, because the main star of it is, I want to say he's Korean, so he grew up with Korean cooking. And everything that he eats, he's always saying, you know, why is Italian considered so great? And he's like, when Korean's better, and we do these things better. Like, our noodles are better than your noodles. Yeah. But it's just like the themes for each episode, and they just go along and they jump around to the different countries, and they do all this stuff. And it's just such a great, interesting show. In the 5th episode, I think it was, it gets a little uncomfortable for me, because they're in a nation that one of the specialties there is donkey, and I love donkeys, and I could not really handle that. Yeah, especially I'm trying to have my lunch, and the guy is like, look, I don't want to disrespect anyone else's culture. I don't want to disrespect the people that you eat what you eat. You've taken to what you take to. He's like, this is my sensibilities, should not be your sensibilities. But I can't fucking eat donkey. You know, I just can't do it. Whereas friend is like, I'm going to eat donkey. And it's like, seriously, a prized thing there. Past that point, the rest of the series is just, it's kind of like a no nonsense. And the guy, like I said, is very opinionated. He sees things a certain way. He wants things a certain way. But he does expect, and he does explore, or he respects and explores other places, other cultures, and he goes around and he tries all these things. And it's just, I think it's really well done. It's the main guy is a chef. Kind of the second person in the series that's with him is a food writer. And they're the two leads who kind of like walk you around through this. Aziz Ansari shows up in it a couple of times because he's friends with the guy. Michael Forgione from American Iron Chef is on there when they're doing the Italian versus Asian competition thing. Oh, and Nick Kroll is sort of the commentator for that one, because they do a debate and he's just giving them shit from the audience the whole time. It's really well done. It's really fun. It's unfortunately way too short. It's only about 8 episodes for what I assume is only the first season, and I'm hoping that they'll come back. But it is good. It's one of those things that I could just kind of have on in the background doing other stuff, and I wouldn't mind rewatching. I think I actually have restarted it a little bit at home just because I've watched Good Eats too many times. But I would definitely say check it out. Ugly Delicious. It explores food in a way that I think is probably closer to what you'd expect from not the guy who eats the disgusting foods, but who's the other main guy?
Are you talking Anthony Bourdain? Anthony
Bourdain.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit closer to Anthony Bourdain, but Anthony Bourdain, I think, goes into the cultures more.
Yeah.
And while this does a little bit of that, it's more about going in the culture specifically about the food.
Yeah, no, definitely. The other thing it sounds like is the show on Amazon with Emeril Lagasse. I believe it's called Eat the World, that I think I talked about on here after watching the first season, because they also had a pizza episode, but it was in Italy, where it was this guy who sourced all the pizza ingredients, from the wheat to the mozzarella to the sardines, for this pizza within 100 miles of it. But yeah, that's honestly more what it sounds like is, diving into the food and how the food affects the culture than just here's, like Anthony Bourdain, where it's more about the culture, and then, here's the food afterwards. Here's basically an excuse for me to write off the meals that we ate on the vacation, on the trip that we took to these places.
Yeah. This one, the second episode was tacos. There's an episode about barbecue. There's an episode about fried chicken, which of course there would have to be an episode about fried chicken. But there's one about fried rice. It's just each of the themes, it just seems to go really well into what it's doing. And there was an episode where he's gone to the barbecue episode, I think, where he goes into probably like Memphis or something, or maybe Texas, where they've got their standardized barbecue, and then there's the Korean barbecue place, and he goes in the Korean barbecue place and he's like, hey, yay, Korean barbecue, but they're trying to make traditional barbecue of the area as opposed to their own original barbecue. He's like, why would you do that? And they're in the back and they're cooking stuff for themselves that is authentic, but they're making the stuff that is to fit into the clientele of everybody else. And it's the same thing. It's like, but why won't you do your stuff? They're like, because our stuff wouldn't pick up here. It's essentially that they weren't brave enough to do it, or they tried it and it didn't take. And so that they found that the culture here wants more of this. They want more of the same kind of stuff. And he's just like, but I don't get it, because this is so good. And to him, it was better in a lot of ways. And he's like, I don't know why you would give this up. And so it's such a cool exploration of the cultures of the food. And I think that's part of what I've always enjoyed about Alton shows, especially Good Eats, is that you understand more the history of the food and why the things are the way they are. And then you get into the food sciences as well, as like how the components come together and what makes sense and why. But this is that culture of like, is our food a reflection of our culture, or is our culture a reflection of our food?
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating, and it's overall entertaining. There's a bit of swearing. It's kind of not at an ElseNerds level of swearing, but it's close sometimes. And so there are points where I had to kind of mute it or get real close to it because I'm watching it at my workplace. Not that anybody seems to really care, but I try to be careful.
The HR person comes by and they're like, turn that down. Like, I've heard what you came in here and talked to me about. Yeah. Don't call HR. So yeah, it's your not safe for work food show, but it's very good. And like I said, 8 episodes, you get through it really fast. And maybe at some point I'll talk about the other show that I watched after. That'll do it for the ElseViews, and we will be right back. And we are back, and it is time for the ElseWords. This is the big discussion point, which this week I have no idea what it could possibly be. I mean, it is an utter complete mystery. For those of you who are watching the video, you see what it is because I'm holding it. It is Action Comics number 1000. I have the 1960s variant cover done by Michael Allred and Laura Allred, because I am a sucker for the Allred's art. Like, I would get that Superman tattooed on me. If the person could do their art justice, and I love his art style. Okay, I'm gonna say I love his art style.
But I find that even your average tattoo artist can reproduce something pretty well, because that's a lot of what they do is reproducing. You find the really good ones to do something original or to put a creative spin on it. Mm-hmm. And it's nice when you find a tattoo artist who you can design something with.
Yeah.
Obviously we come in there with our own ideas as to what we want, and sometimes if you've got an artist friend who will help you design something, you want that kind of exact thing. But if you build up a relationship with the tattoo artist and you let them kind of explore and express themselves with what they're doing, you wind up with something that is much more individualized, much more special. And that's kind of the whole point is tattoo artists are still artists, and some are better than others, but it gives them the ability to do more. But back to Superman.
Yeah, back to Superman. And honestly, as Garley's saying, is that cover Superman looks like the style from my youth. I don't know exactly how old you are, but yeah, I mean that's the all red style. It is done in that classic comic book format. You know, he's also done, actually I should say they, because I believe Laura did some of the colors for Silver Surfer over at Marvel recently with Dan Slott. But that's
they've worked together a long time.
Yeah.
And Mike's got those very clean lines. If you ever have the opportunity, I don't know if you have, check out his Mad Men stuff, because that was his creator-owned work for a long time. Really good, weird, bizarre stuff, but just beautiful to look at. And everything he's worked on is kind of that same way. It's just gorgeous.
Oh yeah. But we're not here talking about that cover. No, we're talking about the other things that were in it. So this is the 80-page super spectacular image, spectacular book that this is. It is actually thick. So this is the one problem I have. Because it is so big, they didn't do the traditional staple binding. They did the graphic novel binding, as you can see right there where it says Action Comics, number 1000 on it. It made some of the panels harder to read.
Yeah, I find that's a problem. One of the things that I think we've talked about this before when it comes to digital comics, I'm still prone to read single comics in paper format. But when it comes to collections, which is what I'd rather read stuff of anyways, I would rather read it digitally, because with collections, you've got to worry about when you open these pages, is the binding strong enough that it's not going to break? The pages aren't going to come out in some cases because some stuff is just not put together as well as others. And it's a big, thick book. It becomes a little bit unruly. Sometimes it doesn't stay open. It just sort of depends. So that digital collection for that seems more interesting to me, feels more comfortable to me. The only thing is when you've got 2-page spreads is you have to have a pretty big reader to be able to do that.
Yeah. And that's where with a lot of them, and Garley's pointing out, unless you're willing to crack the spine, so he buys 2 copies. With this, I was able to get around it because there wasn't really any 2-page spreads, or at least any 2-page spreads that's like, oh my God, I can't read, because it was mainly the text and stuff, where I'm of that same mindset of, I would find it digitally and then read it that way. But with this, I was like, okay, I'm gonna read it because I want to read this for the show, because this is what everyone is talking about.
Well, the reason why people are talking about it, we should point out, is that it's the 80th anniversary of Action Comics.
Yes, and it is also the 1000th issue of a comic book, which has never happened and all that. So I mean, it is a twofer. Like, it was 80 years ago today, Action Comics came out. And Action Comics started, and we got the creation of Jerry Schuster and Siegel. And this book, where I will say right now, it does have a steeper price tag at $7.99. I was okay paying that, because of the fact that you're getting a lot of stories. You're getting Dan Jurgens, Norm Rapmund. You have 10 stories in here. And then you have 3 pinups from John Romita Jr., Walter Simonson, and Jorge Jimenez. But yeah, all these stories are so good in here. You've got a brilliant story with Superman and Lex Luthor called The Fifth Season. That was written by Scott Snyder with art by Rafael Albuquerque. But yeah, flipping through here for the visual people, Marv Wolfman did some stuff in here. The big one is the back part, because that is the premiere of Brian Michael Bendis with DC. A little upstart writer who did some work over at Marvel Comics, coming over to DC. And that's the one that's doing a lot of setup here.
Surprised he didn't talk about his work at Caliber.
Because I don't know his work at Caliber. So he is doing he's setting up the story for the short limited series that he is doing with Jim Lee called The Men of Tomorrow. And the villain that they set up in here, which I heard a lot of people talk about, actually is really interesting. And I'm not going to say why it's interesting, but it's interesting. You know, with what they're setting up here, I like it because it's telling me that with Brian Michael Bendis in here, hopefully Jeff Johns won't have to retcon all the time, you know, and do these big do these big issues like Rebirth, where it's going to fix everything, air quotes around the word fix, where, you know, they'll have someone else who can do some good stuff. Some of the other people they got in here, they got Brad Meltzer in here doing a story. That story was really good. It's called Faster Than a Speeding Bullet. They talk about a lot about, you know, this is a crash course in Superman. There's a story in here about with Vandal Savage sending him back to the beginning, and he's reliving everything. You know, talking about, you know, with the shield, with the classic shield, where he didn't, you know, he couldn't fly, he didn't have, you know, all these other powers, and how he was like a bull in a china shop and all that. And I'm like, dude, this is just so good. Like, I love this, and I mean, there's not much more I can say.
Well, so this is what I wanted to talk about in this discussion. Why I recommended it for the ElseWords is that we are talking about a character that has existed for 80 years, 1,000 issues of this comic, not to mention the Superman comic, the Man of Steel comics, which Bendis is now bringing back Man of Steel as a comic series. I think there was Adventures of Superman. There's been a lot of different material with Superman. TV shows, radio shows, movies. It's just like lunchboxes, everything. And that's kind of what I want to get into. And it's reflected in this book, is that this character started out in humble beginnings. You know, it was a couple of guys who created a character that it's been argued whether or not they got ripped off for it or anything, but simple idea, which was still kind of extraordinary at the time, sent from another planet that all his people were killed on, arrives on Earth, raised as a human, shows extraordinary abilities, uses them to right wrongs, fight crime, truth, justice, American way, which was a big deal back then. And for all intents and purposes, that could have been it. You know, a lot of comic characters came and went, and didn't make it these 80 years. You know, some of them have had revivals here and there, but Superman has been constant this entire time. Part of that constance comes from the fact that I think it wasn't the same two guys writing him. At some point, hands changed. And as hands changed and new creative minds come in, everybody put their own little spins on it. Like you're talking about with what Bendis is doing going forward. Will that have to be retconned or not? Superman has seemingly benefited from everybody involved bringing something new to the table, be it an introduction of a character. Now, some characters were there from the beginning. I assume Lois Lane, some of the Daily Planet stuff and everything, but other characters, Luthor, secondary hero characters like Supergirl. Like, for years, Superman was the only survivor of Krypton. Then they introduce his cousin, and they introduce the villains from the Phantom Zone, and then they introduce Crypto, the super dog, and Beepo, the super monkey, and the bottled city of Kandor, and all of these other things that get brought in over time that build a mythos. The power sets change. He goes from being able to leap tall buildings in a single bound to actually being able to fly. We get heat vision. We get super breath. We get super hypnosis, and that's how he makes people not recognize him through his glasses. The flying backwards in time thing, the weird S symbol that he throws at the Kryptonian in Superman 2, which is probably just Kryptonian technology and only worked in the Fortress of Solitude. But the Fortress of Solitude is another thing that's added. All of these different things that happen when we look at the modern age of comic books and we see how tough it is to get a new superhero at either company, at DC or Marvel, to launch and to be accepted, to have their book sales reach a marketable level and continue and not have to be rebooted or get canceled and put the character in someone else's book or have them get killed off or whatever. Like, how many successful comic characters have popped up in the last 20 years since the 90s? I mean, we're all excited about the fact that Deadpool had a huge hit in his movie, and now they're introducing Cable and Domino that were introduced essentially the same time, I think in the same issue, actually, as Deadpool was.
Yeah.
And we're just seeing them get up to screen. But how many other characters have come and gone in that amount of time alone?
I was going to say, but even then, they don't even meet that mark because weren't they created it in 93 or 93, 94?
Yeah, early 90s.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying, though, is that, but how hard is it to get? Like, we've had a whole bunch of new characters introduced just in the last couple of years, be it in DC Comics or Marvel Comics. And the struggle to get those characters to take off, to have their books, make enough sales to continue to sell their trades and everything. Superman is 80 years old, and Superman has things ahead of everybody else. Growley is pointing out that Batman Detective Comics should hit 1,000 next year, and it'll be the year of Batman. That's another character that's benefited from this. We joked a little bit earlier about Wonder Woman going through some bad phases of costumes and weird storylines. They've all gone through weird storylines and costumes. Dear God, Electric Blue Superman from the 90s. Whoa. And then two Superman, the Superman Red, Superman Blue thing, which is funny because it's a throwback, but still. The idea of people say, well, Superman's boring, and that's why it's hard to get him to work on the big screen. I can't understand how anybody can think of the rich, illustrious history of the character of Superman and just him.
Yeah.
And find him boring, let alone the wealth of the supporting cast of Lois Lane, who is one of the most incredible characters in comics in her own right, not just as a supporting character, but as herself. Jimmy Olsen, and what was done with Jimmy Olsen in the stories by Jack Kirby, especially Perry White. These characters are so great. And then Superman's Rogues Gallery is easily in the top 5, maybe even higher than that, of Rogues Galleries in comics. Superman's Rogues, Batman's Rogues, Spider-Man's Rogues, Flash's Rogues. Like, if you want to get the best villains, those are the ones who are giving them to you. You just have everything to choose from those 4 characters. There, you have no loss of like, oh, well, I'd like to have this kind of villain. There's one. You can easily pick from any of their sets to find a villain that will work out. And how they interact with those characters is just so cool. So when you've got a character that's been literally able to do anything and has had every different kind of story done with him, and every other company has ripped him off in some way to make their own Superman or their own anti-Superman. You've got your Sentries, you've got your Irredeemable, you've got Supreme over at Extreme Studios that Alan Moore did. So many different things of like, yeah, it's like Superman, but Superman's the real deal. And it's just like, it's kind of unfair because he is the pinnacle hero. He's not just like the top hero of DC Comics, but he is essentially the top hero of comics overall. It's unfortunate because I always was more of a Captain Marvel fan than a Superman fan, and it's because of the similarities that unfairly found in court. The Captain Marvel got shit canned, and Fawcett Comics had to go away, and DC got to grab Captain Marvel, but like they never put him in the same pedestal that they put Superman.
Yeah,
and that's the thing with DC. It's their trinity. They know these are our moneymakers. It's Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and even then, Wonder Woman didn't seem to land at the same point. That's why we had World's Finest with Batman and Superman for the longest time.
And I'll point out something here for the people who complain about Superman being too, like whatever it is, for being on the big screen. I mean, for the movies, yeah, it might be a little bit more difficult because people expect things differently. But I mean, look at TV. Have we had a live action Batman TV series since the 66 Batman that has, lasted a while? I am not including Gotham in this, by the way, because that's not a Batman show.
Yes, we have had Arrow, which Stephen Amell actually took somebody insult on Twitter, Walmart Batman. And he's like, I'm owning that. I am using that, and I'm owning that now. I'm Walmart Batman. But
that's more to the credit of Stephen Amell and all that. But
yes.
But even then, So even you go there, you go Arrow. Arrow has what, 6 seasons? We'll have 6, 7 seasons, I believe. Yeah, 6 seasons. They've got renewed for a 7th. Still got 4 more seasons before you catch up on Smallville. Smallville, wildly successful, with the WB and then into CW.
But I sort of challenge you: is Smallville any more a Superman story as Gotham is a Batman story?
Big difference between the two is Smallville truly is Clark Kent before he's Superman.
Gotham is Bruce Wayne before he's Batman, supposedly. Until we see him in the Cape and Cowl, he's not Batman. And until we saw Clark as Superman, he was a red-blue blur. He was these other things. We had a Justice League in the series without a Superman. We had a Supergirl in costume in the series without a Superman. So it's the same deal. And it was always said, we're not going to make him fly. We're not going to call him Superman. Because as soon as we do that, that's when we close the door on it. And so it feels a little bit like they were ashamed, which I don't think that's really what it was. It's just, we know the audience that we're marketing this to. They're not going to buy a show about a guy flying around in blue tights and a red cape with his drawers on the outside, which I'm so glad are coming back. But we can do a drama, a teen drama about a guy who feels different and alien and has secrets that he has to hide from the people that he's most wanting to entrust with his secrets. And then they just kind of ballooned out from that. And his best friend is going to one day be his worst enemy.
Yeah. I will put it to you this way. This is more a Superman show than Gotham is a Batman show. Because, I mean, with this, they're still hitting on the core of why Superman how Superman gets to this point here, gets to be the guy standing there with his hands on his hips, wearing his underwear on the outside, with the cape flapping in the wind, and then off to go save someone and all that. Where with Gotham, it's something completely different. I even heard them, talk about how they're going to reboot the series next year, and I'm just like, okay, and I understand there's a following. I don't want to rag on it because it's not my cup of tea, but at the same time, it seems like they're not hitting at the same, I'm going
to admit that neither is my cup of tea. I had a lot of problems with it, but I liked Smallville up until Jonathan died, because that felt like, again, when it stopped being really what I expected from a young Superman learning his powers story, because there wasn't somebody who could really teach him anymore. On the other hand, that's also about the time that they introduced Lois, and I think Lois brought a lot to that show.
Yeah.
But with Lois's introduction, he should have been Superman by then. So it lost a lot of that dynamic for me. Still, Gotham, definitely not my show. And I see your points. It's just, when you've got a Supergirl show on TV, which is great, you should have a Superman show.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because once you have Superman, and I think they've addressed this a little bit with Supergirl too, it's hard for the other characters to be at that level.
Yeah.
You either have to depower the character, which takes away some of the hubris of who the character is. Not the hubris, the admiration of the character, I guess, is all I can say, because he's the guy. When people are standing next to Superman, they should feel like, holy shit, I'm standing next to Superman. And it doesn't matter if you're Green Lantern, and it doesn't matter if you're Aquaman. You should be like, yeah, but there's this guy, and it's not like I think I'm shit, but next to this guy, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I can pull my weight. I can't pull his weight. Wonder Woman can pull her weight compared to Superman. Batman can, in a very different way, pull his weight. And so it's the process of making these things. But once you have those three, and that's what we don't have in the CW shows, again, because how much does Green Arrow shine next to those three characters? How much does the Flash? If he's super fast, we saw that in the Justice League movie. It's like, hey, I'm super fast. Oh, fuck, Superman's just as fast as I am, it looks like. or at least really close, and it's going to fuck me up. That kind of stuff is, again, did Superman become too powerful? And did he become too powerful because over time, each person who came in wanted to put their new spin on it, and they did that with a new power? Or they were like, hey, I've created this thing, and I want Superman to be able to fight the villain, but the only way he can pull out of it is if he can do this special thing that we've never had him do before. And they would do that on Smallville all the time, especially in the early seasons. Like when they introduced the heat vision, it was like they alluded to it in that episode, but it's not like they had alluded to it for weeks going into it. It was just all of a sudden, well, I need heat vision, and here it is. That's the kind of storytelling that is aggravating because it's the Deus Ex Machina, but it is what happened over the years. And so now Superman has so many different things. You know, he's been a super genius. He's been a scientist. He's been all these different things in the comics that the only way to bring it back is to reboot him or to depower him in some way. And that's tough. It's not as bad as taking away the marriage, which has killed things. But that's another part too, is that we're in an era now where Superman has a kid and Batman has a kid, you know, and these kids have personalities and they've had their own comic and stuff. So we have moved past, like, Superman as I knew him wasn't married to Lois Lane. He didn't get married to her until the 90s, and that was just because they wanted to beat the Lois and Clark show. But they definitely have like a kid now, which is like, that's a permanent thing. And it leads to do you keep going forward with that? Does that kid grow up? Does Superman age when that kid grows up? Because Superman has constantly been in his 30s.
Yeah.
Like, as long as I've known him, he's always been in his 30s. Unless you're talking about Earth 2 Superman, where he got to age with Lois and everything. That's just been where he is. Batman, same thing. Batman's in his 30s. Dick Grayson's in his early 20s. When he wasn't a teenager, when they introduced Tim Drake, Dick got aged up. Tim was a teenager. But then it's like, now we've got 50 Robins running around. They can't all be in their fucking 20s and teens.
Yeah.
Just and that's the continuity issue. There's benefits because everybody has a Superman story that they can go and find and be their Superman. But there's hindrances because, but to make that all work in one big line of continuity, it's tough. You know, your favorite Superman story contradicts someone else's favorite Superman story.
Yeah, that's where I look at, like, personally, I look at the New Superman of China book, where it's written by Gene Luen Yang, where they limited his powers. You know, it was him discovering the powers, but even then they limited it with, you know, he has, you know, essentially 8 powers. He has super speed. He has it's speed, strength, hearing, laser vision, but there's a couple of ones that I'm forgetting right now. But I mean, it's very, you know, it is limited, and they're basically like, this is it. Now, if the Superman of China book, or, you know, the Justice League of China book, as it's, you know, it's switched over to, if that's, you know, still carries on, which I hope it does, because it's the only Justice League book that I am actually reading at this point, until No Justice. Then, I mean, that part to me seems like it makes a lot of sense, because, you know, and, you know, sort of solves this problem, because it is a lot of the powers that when you go ask Joe somebody off of the street who, you know, only really knows Superman from like the movies and maybe Smallville, but doesn't know of, you know, or really care to look into the breadth of history with all the powers that Superman has had. Those are usually the ones that they say that he has. Like, oh, he's got, you know, the super speed and the flight, and, you know, and the X-ray vision, and the, you know, the heat vision and frost breath, you know, stuff like that. They don't get into, well, he's got super ventriloquism and, you know, some of the other bullshit powers that he's had over the years.
The things that are the bat shark repellent of Superman.
Yeah.
And that's the Justice League cartoon did a really good version of Superman where they kept his power levels lower until that point in time where he's fighting Darkseid, and he reveals, he's like, you don't understand. I've been holding back this entire time because I'm afraid of what would happen if I unleashed my full strength on somebody. But I don't have to hold back with you. He just gets so fed up and he just unleashes, and you see like, oh shit. But that would be, and that makes sense for the character. There's a potential power level there that he doesn't open up with because he could do too much damage. He's trying to protect humanity. He's trying to protect his adopted world. So he can't lead with that much power. Plus, anytime you introduce that much power, it ups the threats that are put at you. You know, it's one thing for someone to push past their limits from time to time, show a feat of strength, and then get out of something. But when it's like, oh yeah, I can bench press this entire galaxy, it's like, well, then we know that we are not playing at a level that you're playing at, and we have to up our games to that. And so that's where it's like, okay, shit, you know. But as a writer, you write yourself into a corner of how do you have something that can compete with Superman? And so you either have to introduce cheats, or you have to introduce 10 different versions of Kryptonite, or you have to bring it back. I think we've tried to make him so omniscient and so important that it's a struggle to keep him in check with everything else. And I like a balanced team and a balanced world more. I like those kinds of stories more. It's just the same that it's a little ridiculous that they've made Wonder Woman bulletproof in the comics from time to time when she's got the wrist bracelets that are supposed to block bullets. That's one of the cool aspects of Wonder Woman, is that she would block the bullets with the bracelets, and to make her bulletproof. It's like, well, then why are you doing that? And I get that. Yeah, well, you know, they're not just blocking bullets; they can block other things too. But it's like that's that specialness of, this is why she's cool. You know, the lasso makes her cool. The bracelets make her cool. The tiara is cool. Like the invisible jet for a long time was cool. And I just love that stuff, even if it doesn't all make sense. That classic feel. But again, so many times that I've seen the DC universe relaunch numerous times. We've seen it relaunch in our friendship, and we haven't known each other that many years. But like, I can tell you, in my lifetime, I've seen it relaunch. A few years go by, relaunch, or soft reboot, or whatever they call it at that point, and we kind of like reset, get back, do it again. And that's how it's always going to be. And so it's weird when someone comes in and is like, everything you know about Superman is going to change. Well, that's great hyperbole. Yeah. But it's kind of like, how many times have I heard that at this point? If for the new fan, it may be something interesting, but for the old fan, it's not. But if you can tell a good story, then we can accept it. And we know that everything that we know about Superman is going to change back at some point, and then it's going to change again, and it's just a constant cycle. But that's what keeps Superman relevant. Superman's also one of the things that has been part of the Mickey Mouse law, which is the copyright term limits, that just they kept extending copyrights further and further out so that other companies wouldn't get to do Superman stuff, and the original owners wouldn't get the rights to Superman back. So they've worked out stuff where they paid the families off for it. But the copyright laws, Superman should have been in the public domain decades ago, just like Mickey Mouse should have been in the public domain decades ago. And it's at one part frightening to think, what if anybody could just have Superman and just tell the stories that they decide to tell with him and change stuff up? And how hard would it be? Because just because you have the rights to Superman doesn't mean you have the rights to everything that is part of Superman's world and life, like Supergirl, Bottleton and Candor, or Superboy, all these other things. But how weird would it be if like Marvel could do a Superman comic? Or how weird would it be if Boom Studios could do an actual Superman comic because it's out there? Or Dynamite, or Avatar, of all things, Avatar Press with their weird books, Superman having zombie sex. It's like that's something that could conceivably happen. It kind of does in the parody films anyways. But you at the same time, copyright laws are supposed to expire for a reason. And I'm both bothered but they don't, because of things like this. But I also still want to protect certain institutions, and Superman to me is an institution more than it is something that can just be like put out there for anybody to have their hands in. I don't know. When you think of the amount of people that you've seen write Superman books, in the time that you've been reading comics. Mm-hmm. What is your epitome of what your vision of Superman is?
A lot of it, honestly, is, and I will point out with this, I mean, I've seen probably 9 new writers new to me. I'm using, with that because, actually, no, I think maybe only 8 of them, because it ended with, this capped Dan Jurgens, or theoretically capped Dan Jurgens run on Action Comics with 1000. But I mean, it's been intriguing because I came in during the New 52 relaunch. So it was, Grant Morrison's run on Action Comics, but then what I gravitated more towards was the Superman comic that I forget who it was written by.
George Perez was doing it at first.
Yeah, George Perez, and then it was taken over later by some other people. And it was one of those things that seeing, like, a lot of the Superman, he had the same, the same thing of, it was save the people. It was to help basically protect his home because where he was from is no longer there, sort of deal. That's one of the things that they hit at in issue 1000. And I think it's one of the things that, like, seeing, like, they did create some new power sets when they brought on John Romita Jr. to do the art. I forget who they had writing the book at the time, but that's where they gave him the solar flare ability.
Right.
But they, at the same time, they also put a leash on it at the time, and now I don't know where it stands now, but with him using the solar flare, it then made him human for about 24 to 48 hours. And then there was some other shenanigans of depowering him, which I think was probably just a way to retcon some of the powers, to where then they can, if we need them again, then we will write them in and stuff like that. But I think I forgot what the original question was.
Well, do you have your idea of what a definitive Superman is, between TV shows, movies, cartoons, comic books? Like, in my head, I see Superman a specific way, and it's funny because I've read so many generations of comics and seen these shows and everything. And there's so many different choices of what Superman could be, but in my head, he's still this one thing, and it's not easy to just quantify without going through a ton of examples and stuff. Yeah. But, like, that's why I know, for me personally, Man of Steel felt so off. Mm-hmm. But it exists in the same theory that Superman can be all these different things, because everybody has their own interpretation.
Yeah.
And for somebody else, that is their Superman.
Yeah. So I think for me, like, with watching, like watching the cartoon shows growing up, and then, now getting into comic books, I think for me, the definitive Superman is the Superman that, is, like I said before, is going to do his best to save humanity, to save the little person, just because of the fact that it's what's right. He does the right thing, here. And I think that's where I can agree with you, where Man of Steel, where it doesn't really land, because, you see, especially the end scene in there where he's, fighting Zod, and they're trashing Metropolis and all that. And it's like, he doesn't care about humanity. It seems like he doesn't care about humanity. He just wants to be the last Kryptonian on, in the universe, is almost what it seems like.
You watch the Jim Jeffries show?
Yep.
I like Jim Jeffries. I like his show. But at the end of every episode, he says, I think we can all do better.
Yeah.
And that is Superman to me. Mm-hmm. Is a matter of, while people will perceive him as being perfect, the perfect specimen, that's part of why Lex despises him, is because he's both perfect and alien, and so it's unfair that this thing comes from another world and is the perfect human, and so he sees that as a cheat and something that he wants to destroy.
Yeah.
But in Superman's mind, he's not perfect. Just like in Superman's mind, and this is something that Quentin Tarantino got wrong in Kill Bill, Superman's mind, he's Clark.
Mm-hmm.
In Kill Bill at the end, Bill is telling the story about how Superman sees human beings as weak. So he portrays himself as Clark Kent as weak, as hiding his powers and stuff, because that's how he sees humans. That's not how Superman sees humans. Superman sees himself as a human that has extraordinary abilities. He was raised by humans. And so it wasn't until his near adulthood that he discovered where he was from. Again, in my interpretation, in things that I've seen and the way that I've collected in my head of who Superman is. But Superman as Clark doesn't put himself above anybody else.
Yeah.
He looks at the bigger picture. And it is that Boy Scout mentality. It is that thought process of like, I have to do things the right way. And I'm the person who's going to help the old lady across the street. I'm the person who's going to return money that I found outside of a store, and these are the ideals that I try to bring into my life. This is what is not necessarily attainable, but what is something that I strive towards. Like, this is why he's such a hero to me. Why superheroes are heroes to me is these kind of things are the stuff. I like a hero who struggles. I like a hero who has boundary issues and like isn't always making the right choices. But I also like the heroes that do make the right choices, because it's not necessarily a parable that's trying to teach you how to do that yourself, but it is a nice example.
Yeah.
And Superman is an example, and he's an ideal, and it's important to have ideals, and he can still have failings. You can allow him to fail. You can allow him to struggle, but not fail to the point of where he gives up his ideals. That to me is his biggest superpower, is that Superman does right, does what he thinks is right. And he can see when he makes mistakes and learn from them, but he's always striving for that being right thing, and not right over somebody else, but right for everybody else. Whereas Batman fights for justice, what he perceives justice to be. And sometimes that is not what's right as much as what's fair, and what's earned. And Wonder Woman fights for truth. That is the core of her character, but is a warrior too, and doesn't see being a warrior as being a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
I love those core concepts of those characters, and everything else is a stretch beyond that, and the gray areas between. But I love that concept of what Superman is, and that's what I look for. And when I think of the character, that it comes from his upbringing from John and Martha. Those things that were instilled into him as a simple farmer raising, this kid that, yes, came from another planet, but raised him like a kid here, and didn't say, hide your abilities to the point where you'll let people die and don't go into danger if it's going to expose you. It's like, yes, we have to protect you, but you're still supposed to be a good person. You're still supposed to look at the big picture and say, if there's no way to save somebody's life without exposing who you are, then yes, of course you're going to expose who you are. We just want you to always know that should be the worst case scenario, but in that scenario, do it. Absolutely do it. Because I think anything less than, you're not a person anymore. You're not a human being. You're something else. You're something that's supposed to be feared, because you don't know how to make the right choices. Because Superman's powers are too much in the hands of anybody who has that kind of doubt.
Yeah.
Of what's right. That's why the character is relevant all through the 80 years and beyond. Is that's how we should feel, is if I have to let myself do something that I think is wrong, or if I let myself take advantage of things because of my abilities, because of my powers and stuff, if I let myself become a sports star because I can, because I'm better than everybody else here, that's a cheat, and that's not interesting. That's a villain. It could be an interesting villain. It's not an interesting hero.
But no, yeah, I mean, that's you've done it again, Corey. You've made great points, and honestly, I mean, there's a lot I could just echo, but I mean, that'll just make the show longer. So I will end it with this. What is, the viewers, the listeners, what is your iconic Superman? What makes Superman true to you?
Or what makes Superman not true to you? What is it about Superman that you don't like? And what kind of hero do you like? And it's cool if you like Spider-Man because his life is a mess, or you like Hulk because his whole thing is tied to losing control. There's no wrong answer on that.
No, this is one of those questions that we ask to get to learn, to start a discussion. And you can start those discussions by contacting us, by leaving us a voicemail at 805-328-3966 or emailing us mail@ElseNerds.com. I encourage both of those options, or even, finding us on Facebook, over at facebook.com/galacticnetcasts, posting there about like, hey, and just mention ElseNerds and all that, or on Twitter at ElseNerds, at Galactic Netcast, or at myself, message me on there, at that Gregor, saying, hey, this is my guy. I will talk about that on the next, right after I see that on the show, being like, hey, this guy brought this up. What do you think about that? Also, on, with the other things, if you want to subscribe or you want to send people or tell people where to go subscribe, go to gncasts.com/subscribe, and it'll have all the links to the mega feeds for individual shows, all that stuff right there. And you can follow our producers, our producer, Beatmasters at Beatmaster80. He had to drop out this evening, which is why I am running the show here.
Although he did prep for us like he always does.
Yeah.
The guy doesn't take a break from producing or helping this show and many other shows, but he does deserve to sleep once in a while.
Yes, exactly. And also, like I said, I mentioned before, also if you go to the ElseNerds YouTube channel, you will find a certain wrestling beta program. If you liked my talk on Andre the Giant, where I talked about WrestleMania weekend, went for about an hour there talking about, about that over at, the YouTube. You can find it here through the Galactic Network stuff. But also you can find my Twitch, where when I get caught up on these things called comic books, I will get, and I'll do more over there at twitch.tv/thatgregor. Corey, you got another show. You're like Mr. Show over here. You have...
Well, I'm just going to talk about, because we've had to miss a couple of weeks of one show because of family emergencies. I will talk about the other show that I do here on the Galactic Network, and that is Podcast of Terror. Me and Matt Stein sit down every week. We talk about a horror-themed movie and just kind of have a discussion about what we thought of it. We give the rundown of it, so it is spoiler-heavy, but we encourage people. At the end of each episode, we'll tell you what the movie is that we're doing the next week. So if you want to watch first, to then be able to listen along. And we're not movie reviewers. We're just a couple of assholes that talk shit out and compare these things to each other and try to have a good time doing it.
Yeah.
So gncast.com/pot.
Yep. And for the other show that should be starting back up here relatively soon, it is at stfucast.com. That is Solutions to Fix the Universe cast.com. Don't type out the whole thing. It's just the initials.
Yeah.
And as always, I got to give a plug because I love the work there. Don'taskcomics.com. It's where you can find the art of Levi Krause, and with the stuff that you helped him write with Balyar and all that. It's, really good stuff. Even if it's, you haven't done anything with it, it's still good, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot there where people can find like, oh, hey, I remember this.
There's a lot of back catalog. I fully intend to get caught up with it. I've been a little frayed in the mindset for a while, but my hope is to get back there and at least finish out the two current series that have been posting. The 4th issue of Spells, which is his comic with Chris Yambar about 3 little very, very vile witches, and Levi's World, the original comic series that I met Levi when he was just about to launch and had been doing stuff on his own. One of my favorite comics of all time. Certainly the inspiration as to why I wanted to work with Levi so bad and help build our friendship. So Levi's World, I will finish posting the last couple issues of that as well. But you can check the back catalogs. Balyar, Strobe, Shock, the comic he does with Scott Hall, which is just really random and weird. All that stuff there. So if you go to don'taskcomics.com, it will take you to links to each of those things.
Yeah. And as always, we give the plug for Sean Burns because it's really a way of our fans here to go, hey, Sean, you coming back? When are you coming back? He's of course at SBurnsPA. And the final thing to be said is this has been a Don't Tell Glenn production. We will see you next week.
Or else.
For more on this Galactic Network podcast, go to gncast.com. That's GNCASTS.com.